Ever shall be. You're listening to Ancient Faith Radio, timeless Christianity 24 hours a day.
This is Everyday Orthodox with your host, Elisa Bielatich Davis. We get together on Sunday nights to meet everyday Orthodox Christians. We're hoping to get to know the members of the body of Christ across all of our various jurisdictions and regions. We may worship in various languages or even on different calendars, but we have so much in common. Come get to know someone new and see how they're living out this Orthodox faith in another corner of the world. After all, every person is an icon of Christ, and as we'll see, every person has a story to tell. If you have a question for tonight's guest, we invite you to call in and join the conversation at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF-RADIO. Now, here's Elisa.
It is December 11th, 2022, and we are live on Ancient Faith Radio. I'm Elisa Bielatich Davis, and this is Everyday Orthodox. Welcome. We get together here on Sunday nights on Ancient Faith Radio to meet a new Everyday Orthodox person. And I really enjoy it. Frankly, I think I've got the best job on Ancient Faith Radio. I feel like Orthodox people in North America, where it's a little disjointed for us, right? Because we don't necessarily know the people in other jurisdictions and in other regions. And, you could have somebody living right down the street from you who's Orthodox too. But if they're another kind of Orthodox, if they're at a different kind of church, maybe worshiping in a different language or even on a different calendar, you may never know that you're both Orthodox. So I think it's always really neat to get a chance to just meet some more Orthodox people. I love going to coffee hours and just sitting down and, just asking people what they're up to. Where are they from? What do they do? People have the most fascinating stories. And I think in particular, the Orthodox population is a really interesting crowd because we do have so many different sorts of immigrants. We have people who they grow up in immigrant families and they have, hilarious stories about their grandparents or something. And then we also have a lot of converts, and our converts come from everywhere and they find the church in all the ways. So I think it's really beautiful. And for me, the main thing about this particular project is sort of trying to build Orthodox unity from the ground up, right? Like a grassroots effort. If we all get to know each other and we all love each other, then I think that kind of unity is the unity that really matters, and the administrative unity will follow that love. So here we are. Let's do it, right? Let's do this together. So you are welcome to join this conversation. You can call in at 1-855 AF Radio. That's 1-855 237 2346. And Matushka Trudy Richter is right here tonight. She's engineering the program and she's taking your calls. So you can call in and speak to the lovely Matushka Trudy, and she'll patch you through and you can ask any questions you like of our guest. And our guest tonight is really delightful. I think you're going to like her a lot. Her name is Susan Zacharia, and Susan is actually a licensed clinical social worker. So she has been providing mental health care to the veteran population for 8 years, which is just really neat. I mean, talk about an overlooked population in a lot of ways. It's a population we don't take good care of always, and so here we have someone who is really taking care of them. So thank God. She has a passion for advocating for mental health resources within Orthodox parish settings, and particular in ethnic parishes where the stigma of seeking care is still really prevalent. And in so many of our communities, it's still hard for us to admit that we need some help, to accept that help, to go and seek that help, and to let each other know that we're doing it. And so Susan is sort of working in that direction to try to help improve things. And she actually serves as the vice president of OCamper. And OCamper had their conference just in November, I think. And they're a fascinating group. So we'll ask her a little bit about that. But she's done a lot of things. She was the co-chair for the Needs Assessment Working Group at the Assembly of Canonical Orthodox Bishops Mental Health Task Force. She has served on the Diocese of Southwest America. She was the secretary for the Department of Counseling Services with the Malankara Orthodox Syrian Church. So it's the Indian Orthodox Church, the Malankara Church. And I would just like to say, every time I've met people from the Malankara Indian Church, they are the nicest people and they have the best sense of humor. So I give them the Sense of Humor Award for Orthodox people. But anyway, she's in Chicago. She is married to her husband, Brandon, and she has a little baby. She just became a mom 7 weeks ago. So we are going to hear all about what sounds like a very busy life, quite frankly. So, Susan, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here today.
Well, we are excited to have you. And my guess is that probably your life is very busy right now, but I bet a bunch of those other things are on hold for a little while you
Yeah.
go.
Well, thankfully, work is also on hold, so
Thank God.
that
Thank
that helps.
God.
Yes, thank God. That helps alleviate some of it. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think right now just trying to get enough sleep to function is really like a full-time job. So I think you're good.
yeah. I've kind of just lowered my standards and decided that being interrupted 3 times a night for about an hour each, it's just the new norm, and that's okay. Radical acceptance is what
That's
I'm going for.
right. I love
Yeah.
that. I love that. Yeah, I remember those years and just feeling like when there's a newborn in the house, like if you take a shower today, you are killing it. You're doing great.
Yes.
Like,
Yep.
so
Yep.
we really have to adjust our expectations for
Yep.
sure. Well,
Yeah.
so Susan, tell me, where were you born? Where did your story start?
Sure. So I was born in Hinsdale, Illinois. So it's a suburb, a southwest suburb of Chicago. And I would probably say that my story probably begins before that. My parents are immigrants from a state called Kerala. It's a state of India. And so they came into the country in the late 80s. And so I grew up in a household where English was not my native tongue. And then shortly after my sister was born, who's 3 years younger than me, we were living in India with my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, for about a year and a half. And I didn't know English, or I didn't speak English until I was in the first grade.
Oh,
So
wow.
even though I was born and raised here, um, I don't think that was it didn't feel like a typical experience, whatever that means,
Right.
early on.
Well, I think
So
that's fair, right? Like whatever typical is, it's
yeah,
probably
whatever that
not
means.
that.
Yeah, it was
Now,
not. It was not that.
one of the things that fascinates me about India is just the number of languages in India. And you brought up language there,
Yeah.
but like, were your parents from the same place? Like, did they speak the same language? I don't know if they're exactly
Yes.
dialects or languages, but like, I know couples who will tell me that that they have one common language, but then they also have in languages from their hometowns that don't match each other. And so
Yeah,
your
that's
parents,
a
though,
good
had the same
question.
thing, right?
Yeah, so they both spoke the same language. So a lot of the languages are there are a ton of different languages in India, but you can typically expect that people within the same state speak a common language. Of course, that's not always true. There are hundreds and hundreds of languages in India, but I think there are about honestly, we just had this conversation about a week ago, my husband and I think we looked online. I think it was about 22 official languages in India. And Malayalam, which is the language most spoken by people from the state of Kerala, is one of them. And so both of my parents speak Malayalam, and most of those that belong to the Indian Orthodox Church speak Malayalam, if not all of them, really speak
Okay.
Malayalam. Yeah.
It's so interesting to me, just the way that all those languages have been preserved. Because usually you need like a geographical distinction and a national distinction. Are the states so different from each other, or is it like why is it that the languages have managed to hold on through all this time?
That's honestly a great question, because although there are geographic differences between regions of India, that's not particularly true of each of the states. I'm sure like a linguist expert would be able to dive in and really explain this really well. But I, in addition to the languages being different in each of the states, the customs and the traditions are quite different as well. For example, in India, you have a very large Christian population. And, we're not talking like Protestant Christianity, we're talking about a really, really old um, tradition of Christianity in Kerala. And that's not true for the other states in India. Christianity may be present in other states, but like the Indian Orthodox Church, you'll find in Kerala, and you'll find it in other parts of India if churches have if the diocese kind of spreads across India, but the seat of the patriarch is in Kerala.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, so it's really interesting. There's a um, Kerala has a large number of Christian population. There's a large Muslim population, a Jewish community in Kerala. There's a lot of diversity within Kerala itself, and perhaps like a great example of how people from different traditions can live harmoniously, in one area for so long. And I suspect much of that diversity is attributed to it being a major trade route historically. Kerala sits at the southwest tip of India. And so it was historically a really important place of trade. And so I suspect that's where the diversity comes from, but I really don't know
Oh, that's neat.
how each of the languages have preserved. That's a great question. I'll probably look into it later tonight.
And see, I'm just quizzing you on India now. Sorry, I didn't warn you
Yeah,
this
it
was
looks great.
coming. But so is the tradition that the Apostle Thomas would have come then to Kerala?
Yes.
Is that why that's the seat? Because that's where Thomas went
Yes.
and
So
like
AD
established things?
52. Yep.
That's so
That's
cool.
that's
That's
what
so
we say. That's what tradition says, that St. Thomas came to Kerala in AD 52.
Yeah. And I don't
And
think most people, I mean, I think a lot of Orthodox people don't realize that one of the oldest Orthodox traditions is right there in India. That's really cool.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
neat.
So my husband and I talk. My husband's Roman Catholic. He's white Roman Catholic, and so we oftentimes have conversations about how in America people have this idea that Christianity is kind of like a white religion. That it's kind of there's sort of this understanding or belief that Christianity is kind of only for those of like the Caucasian and male dominated. And so, what he and I oftentimes talk about is that if people knew that the apostles went to the places that they actually went to, people wouldn't understand Christianity that way. So he's a white Roman Catholic dude, and he's like, you know what? I think Susan's family has been Christian for longer than my family has been. And I'm like, that is absolutely right. Like,
That's
I
right, for
guarantee you that's
sure.
probably true, but
Your
people don't
ancestors
think about.
surely heard about it before his did, right? Like,
Right, right,
absolutely.
right.
Gosh.
But people don't think about Christianity in America to be as diverse as it truly is, and to
Well,
be
and
so
I think
historically diverse.
I think people here, and I don't know if I would say they understand it. I think they just misunderstand it because they have not
Yeah,
maybe heard like the full account of what the early church was doing and where the
right,
apostles were going. And part of the
right.
problem might even just be that because so many of the countries have changed their names, right? That it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh, the apostle went to Perea,
right.
whatever that is. I don't know where he
What
went.
does that mean?
And
Right.
but it is true that I think people think of it as a European, if not
Yes.
Western European phenomenon, and it's
Yes.
amazing because truly, like Alexandria, Antioch, right? Like
Right.
India, these are not the whitest places around.
No.
They're just not.
No, 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 no. And I think it's probably more relevant in recent discussions about race in the country to think about. I've always considered myself, like, my understanding of Christianity is my upbringing of it, which was being raised in the Indian Orthodox Church, and so my understanding of Christianity were my traditions, which are not common to many people that I went to school with, right? But when it's your experience, it's easy to generalize that experience to a broader group. So I can appreciate why one would picture or imagine Christianity to be in one particular way or expressed in one way.
Yeah, especially if that's kind of how your people got it, right? Like it
Right,
all came through this feed, so that's where they're
right,
seeing it. Absolutely. So your
right.
parents came over. Were they already married when they came from India?
So my dad was here in the States before they were married, and then my mom and my dad got married in India, and then my mom came over once she got a visa, and I believe she came in 88 or 90 or so, and I was born in 91.
Oh,
And so, yeah,
oh,
sometimes I
that's
think about how they navigated the world.
right.
And
That's a
it's,
lot, right? Being newlyweds and with a
oh,
baby
yeah,
and getting everything settled, right
yeah,
as they're trying to settle into a new country.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
and they were in Hinsdale, and so
yep.
then is there an Indian Orthodox church there in Hinsdale?
So I was born in Hinsdale. We lived in a couple other suburbs in that area. So we lived in Westmont and kind of moved around. There are four Indian Orthodox churches in the Chicagoland area. And of course, the church that I belonged to was the furthest away from our house. And so the one that we went to was in Chicago. And so every Sunday we would make the 40-minute drive from the suburbs of Chicagoland into the church. But we do have three other parishes in other suburbs of Chicagoland. So Elmhurst, Bellwood, and Oaklawn are the other three churches. But we got
Oh, that's
four Indian Orthodox churches.
yeah. It is
Yeah.
funny when we, drive past several parishes on the way to the
Yeah.
furthest one. I actually do that
Yep.
right now, and I always chuckle to myself, like, and there's another one, and
Yep.
they're all nice people, but it's just this is my parish. What are you gonna
Yeah.
do?
This is where we go. Yeah.
I recently had the honor of speaking to a bunch of Sunday school teachers from the
Mm.
Malankara Church and here
Oh,
in
fun.
Austin. There's a
Okay.
very St. Gregorios, and it
Yeah.
was so much fun. And I was just like, man, if I was any other kind of Orthodox, this is what I would want to be because I just found and I think it's really true of Indian people in general that like the sense of humor among Indian people is just fantastic and just the sense of joy and like so I always enjoy, my Indian friends, but then getting to just be in this room full of people and everybody took their shoes off when they came into
Yeah.
worship, which I think that's the most beautiful tradition, like Moses,
Yeah.
right? At the burning bush. It's so lovely. So for the rest of us, if
Yeah.
you'd like to consider, maybe we could take our shoes off. We'd have to carpet our churches though, so a lot of us wouldn't be ready for that, but we
I
could
have
go
to say,
fishing.
when I first started going to other Orthodox churches, it was so weird for me to keep shoes on. In the beginning, I would take my shoes off as I was sitting in my seat. And then I thought, well, then I might look really strange to other people around me. So I've been keeping my shoes on, but it's still a really strange phenomenon to walk into a church and not take my shoes off.
Yeah, I can imagine because when you've been raised with that, like it just, and it is a
Yeah,
really beautiful thought that, like, okay, it would be wrong for me to wear my shoes in here.
right.
Then all of a sudden, everybody's stomping around in their shoes, and it just feels like, what's wrong with these people? They're just not nearly reverent enough. But
Right.
so growing up, so you mentioned you didn't really speak English until first grade. So does
Right.
that mean were you raised like really in a community of people who were all speaking? Um, I don't know what the name of the language is. I
Yeah,
forgot.
Malayalam. So,
Malayalam.
um, I don't know if it was like intentional in any sort of way, but my parents speak Malayalam in the home. So that was the first language that I was exposed to. And I don't have my earliest memories are probably from when I lived in India, to be honest. Um, so that was, I don't know how old I was. I was like 4 or 5 years old. And my family members that my parents interacted with were also Malayalam speakers, and I was too young to be in school or anything. Um, and so I was just surrounded by Malayalam speakers, and it's interesting because my husband and I have had a lot of conversation about language in the last couple of weeks, as we're thinking about what we want Anya, our daughter, what language we want to introduce her to. And so we've been talking about whether or not I feel confident in speaking to Anya only in Malayalam. And I wish I did, because at one point it was the only language I knew. I went to school in Kerala, so I read and wrote in Malayalam. And I think over the years, since I came back and my social network and school, were all largely in English, um, my Malayalam skills have not been as strong as they were when I was, 4 or 5. So, um, I would love to brush up on it again, and I was taking some classes with a tutor, but it's one of those things that I took for granted when I was younger, and now it's so cliche, but now I just really wish I was really fluent in it, and more importantly, comfortable in it, because you don't interact with many people that speak Malayalam.
Yeah, you get
Um,
rusty if you can't practice it
yeah,
with people and you don't,
right.
and then you're no longer confident even of your own pronunciations. And
Oh yeah,
you're like, I think this is, but well, it's hard too because, if, when I remember before I had kids, I had this idea, oh, I'm going to speak Spanish all the time. Then my kids will speak Spanish. It's going to be great. And then
yeah,
you realize that, like, well, actually, you have to only speak that language to
yes,
do, like, for that, it really has to be immersion. And then that
yes,
means that everything you say to your daughter, your husband doesn't understand. And
yes,
it just like, I don't know. I mean, and it impacts the relationship a little bit. Not, it's
yep.
interesting, right? But so it's a beautiful thing, but it's a big decision. There's a lot.
It takes a lot of commitment. Yeah, and,
Yeah,
and so that's what we were talking about, is the idea of one parent, one language. And you would have to really, really commit to it in order for it to be effective.
yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know. It's something that I'm still thinking about. I practice it with her, but she doesn't judge me for my poor pronunciation yet.
She has
So
no
it's a little
idea.
bit
It's not
easier.
until she's a teenager and she comes back and says, Mom, you taught me
Yeah,
all the wrong words.
yeah,
But then you can,
yeah,
yeah, it is. That's neat though. And it's lovely to be able to pass on the traditions. Now, when you go
yeah,
to church in your church, is everything in
yeah.
English? Are things in Malayalam? What is it like?
Yeah, so I go to the right now. So we got married, I've switched jurisdiction over to the OCA church. So I actually go to St. Macario's OCA church in Hyde Park in the Chicagoland area. But when I was in the Indian Orthodox church, and I still have, like, my parents still go there, my sister still goes there, my family and friends are mostly Indian Orthodox. The language that's largely spoken, at least liturgy, is spoken, is predominantly in Malayalam. There has been efforts to have it be in English. There's a ton of effort to translate feast days and other services into English so that it could be used in English. And some parishes do it really well, but the default, I would say, is Malayalam to go back
Right.
to.
And
Um,
and is that,
yeah,
not to press too much, but is it
yeah.
that because you got married, you need your husband to be able to hear everything in English? Is that
So
how the
that's
change made, or are there a whole lot of factors
yeah.
that went into it?
No, I appreciate you asking, because I actually was, as I was preparing for this podcast, I was like, what would I talk about? And the thing that really comes to mind is sort of like a defining moment is probably when I made that switch in many ways. And so in the Oriental Orthodox tradition that the Indian Orthodox Church belongs to, um, generally, and I can't speak to all of the Oriental Orthodox churches, but I know in the Indian Orthodox Church, you cannot marry outside of the Indian Orthodox faith. And so the partner has to um, become Indian Orthodox. And so, my husband's Roman Catholic. And one of the reasons that I was enamored by him is when, we had this conversation, he was just like, I don't feel compelled to convert. Like, I could nominally convert, but that's not who I am. That does not feel true to my faith. And I don't believe, it doesn't make sense. And so um, I had to explore options of either not having a life with my husband, or consider what my other options would be, which is when I've reached out to several Eastern Orthodox mentors that I've had. And I know in the Eastern Orthodox traditions, almost in all jurisdictions, if I'm not mistaken, there's this sort of um, kind of like a pastoral consideration for people to remain Orthodox while their spouse is not Orthodox. And so, I was really comfortable with the Antiochian Orthodox parishes. That's where I went to church when I was in college. And I was familiar with the OCA parishes. and he and I just started attending Eastern Orthodox churches in the area. We came across the small St. Macarius Hyde Park Missions Parish, and we decided that it would be something that we could make work. The other really honestly important part that factored into this decision of mine was that even if he was willing to become Indian Orthodox and whatever that might mean, I did not want him to be an example in any sort of way. I did not want my kids to be sort of like stand out in the crowd. We are heavily, like on any given day in a typical Indian Orthodox church, 100% of its attendees are from, it has some background that connects them back to Kerala. And so you don't see much diversity within the parish setting. I think that's true for many immigrant churches.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And
I think there are plenty of,
yeah,
Serbian churches and Greek churches and
yeah,
places where it's like, okay, I'm the one who married the American
yeah,
and my
yeah. And
kids are the ones who have an American parent. And,
yeah,
not that we're not all Americans. Of course we all
right.
are. But there is that, I don't know, I feel like that's the way everybody talks about it, right? It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
because my
And
kids always laugh, even in the Serbian church, it'll be like, oh, well, they're white. And it's like, well, you
yeah,
guys are white too. Like, but that's what they mean by
right.
that, right? It's like, well,
Yeah. There's
they have the
something,
American culture and we have
yes,
the Serbian culture. And
yes.
yeah,
There's something different. And that's what I had told him. I told him specifically, I'm like, I don't want to come to church on Sundays, um, and be set apart in that way, or to be known
yeah.
or identified by cultural factors. I did not want the focus to be that. And so I think for many reasons it made us it made sense for us to make that switch. And so
Well, and
yeah, I
especially I
still,
think the fact that you would have perhaps not been able to commune would be a
yeah,
really big deal. I mean, that's a
right,
very big deal. But
yes,
but yeah, in the Eastern Orthodox churches, you can marry someone. You can even marry in the church if they're baptized and with the Holy Trinity. So were you
yes,
guys able to have an Orthodox wedding, or did you really,
yes.
really want to do a Catholic wedding? What did you guys do?
No, no, no. He sought out counsel from the people that he knew within the Catholic tradition. And in the Catholic tradition, if their recommendation is, if you marry an Orthodox, if your spouse is Orthodox, they recommend more or less that you have an Orthodox wedding, because they consider the Orthodox churches to be as the sister churches of the Catholic Church.
Right.
And so we had a Orthodox wedding. It was a really beautiful and interesting wedding because it was the first time either of us had been to an Eastern Orthodox wedding before. And the first time probably that all of our guests, with the exception of one or two, have seen an Eastern Orthodox wedding.
Oh,
And so
that's
it was
funny.
very beautiful. Neither of us we didn't have a bridal party, with the exception of my sister, who was the maid of honor, who would kill me if I said that she was not in my party. But my sister was the maid of honor. But we didn't have like bridesmaids and groomsmen. And so we entered in the traditional manner, where we came in from the back of the church and then was led up by the priest to the front of the church during the service of the blessing of the crown. And so we did the betrothal in the back of the church, and then the rest of the service in the front. And so we didn't plan. I'm bringing this up because we didn't plan for the end of the service. There was no exit, and so the
Right.
service just ended. And then we looked at one another, and Father James looked at us, and he's like, "That's it." And so we just turned around and looked at our guests, and we're like, "I guess that's it, you guys."
Yep.
It was a beautiful wedding. It was, very elegant, and it was an exciting time because we got married in May of 2021. And so it was just when the vaccines had come out and most of our guests were vaccinated, but we still only had 48 people at our wedding. So it was the first time people were at an event. And yeah, we just didn't plan the exit.
Isn't that
So
funny?
it was like
Yeah.
a,
Well,
yeah,
well, it's true, right? Like most other wedding services do have like a finale and everybody walks down the
yeah,
aisle and that's that. And yeah,
yeah,
we just sort of stop. Well, just like a baptism or liturgy or
yeah,
anything else, right? It's like
yeah.
it's just a sacrament, guys.
We're like,
There's
this is
no grand
it.
entrance, no exits. It just, we just do
Right,
it. We just do
right,
it. But no,
right.
that's beautiful. I love that. Well, we're going to take a very short break and we will be right back with Susan Zacharia. And remember, you're welcome to call in if you like. 1-855 AF Radio. That's 1-855 237 2346. We'll be right back.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich Davis will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855 237 2346. That's 855 AF Radio.
For all of us, male or female, parent or not. That's what it's often like, isn't it? It's at the end of our own tether that the miracle happens. It is in our greatest weakness that God's strength is known. It's when we decrease that He can increase. It's in losing our life that we find it. To put it another way, it's in the spot where Saint Morwenna falls down, exhausted, that her spring rises up. It's when the people of God curse Moses in the wilderness and wish themselves back in Egypt that they hear the crack of the staff, the gush of water through the rock. It's when God Himself is spat upon and mocked and bleeding and dead that the glorious resurrection is ushered in.
From 7 Holy Women, Conversations with Saints and Friends, now available as an audiobook at Audible, Amazon, and iTunes.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich Davis. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855 237 2346. That's 855 AF Radio. Here again is Elisa.
Welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We're here tonight with Susan Zacharia. And Susan grew up in the Malankara Indian Orthodox Church. So we've been talking a little bit about that. But she's now in the OCA and has married her husband, Brandon. So we kind of zipped right through your childhood. And I do want to know, like, what kind of a kid were you? So you're in first grade in the Chicagoland area learning English in schools like ESL. Was that really hard? Do you feel like that had any kind of negative impact on you? Or were you young enough that you just kind of picked it up and ran with it?
I have to say, I think I'm still pretty oblivious to like the world around me in many ways. Honestly, all I remember was being in ESL, being pulled out of class, but I didn't experience that in a negative way because it meant that I was doing like these arts and crafts of sorts, and that felt fun to me, and uh, probably also like doable because I didn't have to understand what was, like it was being explained to me in a way that I was able to understand. In hindsight now, I'm sort of amazed at first grade Susan because I didn't know English. I was in ESL for first grade and then probably some of second grade. And then by the end of second grade, I was reading the first Harry Potter book. And then
Whoa.
ever since then, like I was reading the Harry Potter books as they came out. I still read a lot, but I was such a reader when I was young. And it's amazing to me that kids could just switch like that. Like I could go from not understanding English to completely being able to not only understand but also read within a year or two. And so yeah, I felt like I don't think I realized that I didn't know English, or I don't know how much of that I realized. But I have a lot of thoughts about that now as an adult looking back at it.
But thank God. And it's probably in part because the ESL teachers were great with you, right?
Yeah,
Like it was a
it must
positive thing. It's like,
be.
oh, good. I'm headed out, and so it sort of makes sense that in a way it would be a relief to be in a
Yeah,
classroom where it's not so much hard
yeah,
work.
yeah.
So maybe the
Yeah.
question would have been, was it really hard for the hours that you were not in ESL?
That's
But
that's also an interesting point because I do remember in the first grade getting in trouble for something, which to this day I do not know what I got in trouble for. But we had a system where if there was like a green fish if you were good, yellow fish if you were kind of starting to get in trouble, and then the red fish if you were in trouble. And for some reason, I had gotten a red fish that day. And to this day, I cannot remember what I got in trouble for. And it's probably because I just didn't understand what was
Right.
happening. Like, I
Right.
didn't
You probably didn't
understand the
follow
instructions.
directions. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Nice,
had no
right?
idea.
Like that's so annoying. Don't you want to just sit that teacher down and be like,
A
"Hey,
hundred percent.
if the kids don't understand, maybe red is never appropriate. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
maybe
Maybe that's
maybe
not
there's never a time for that. Like maybe
exactly.
yellow,
Yeah.
maybe."
In hindsight, I would find the words or some way to express that. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
have a call actually. We have a caller and it's TV. Hi TV, how are you?
Fine. How are you?
I'm great. TV is a longtime listener and he has a question for you, Susan. What's
Well,
your question?
actually, as a comment, I just wanted to tell you how touched I was about the people removing their shoes at the church. Now, my wife and I live in an RV, and we've been at many different churches. One we went to for a very long time. It was very common for a lot of the women, maybe even some of the men, to remove their shoes during the long service. And I always thought, yeah, like Moses and whatever. So I was just touched by that.
Mm.
I'm with you. I'm with you on that TV. I think it's really beautiful and it's so reverent, right? Because it's that idea of, you're entering a holy place. You have to take your shoes off because we don't just tromp all over this place, right? Like that's really special. It is really neat. You do miss it, don't you, Susan? A little bit.
Oh yes, I do. I mean, it's custom for us not to wear shoes in the home either. And so we like even when we go to like my family's home, we always take the shoes off at the front and then walk into the house without shoes on. And that's what we do at our home too. So it really makes sense from that standpoint as well as to why we wouldn't wear shoes in a church setting, in a sort of a
Do,
reverent setting as well.
do I
Absolutely.
dare mention what church it was?
Yeah, where was
Uh,
it? Oh, are you asking where?
It's St. Elizabeth the New Martyr in West Columbia, South Carolina. And I think the priest, Father Mark, knows about it, as some of his family members used to do that. This is quite a few years ago. I think his
That's
daughters are all grown up and gone now. But it's a very, very nice church. And I always was touched by the way people felt free to take their shoes off.
mhm.
I think that's neat. That's really neat. Oh, that's great. Thank you for calling, TV. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
Take
Okay,
care.
take care. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Yeah, I think that really is beautiful. I think probably in a lot of Eastern Orthodox context, people have not seen that at all. And it's
Mm,
here and there at my Greek parish, there you'll see a couple of pairs of shoes in the
mm.
narthex. And so I think, here and there we've had parishioners who do. And I've always thought like, that's the way to go. That's
Yeah.
smart. But but at any rate, so as you were growing up, Susan, like what kind of you already said you read voraciously, and that's impressive. Frankly, even if you were a native English speaker, reading Harry Potter in second grade is actually a pretty good accomplishment. So the fact that you were doing it after only 2 years of studying English, that's pretty great. What else were you interested in? What kinds of things did you do?
Um, oh boy. I Yeah, I read a lot. I also would write a lot, and by that I meant mostly journaling. So my second grade teacher gave us these sort of like in class made journals, and it was an assignment for us to spend like 5 to 10 minutes every day in class and write something, and then we would take it home maybe once a week or something, and that sort of started me on a journaling kick that I still have not been able to that has remained with me since. So since the second grade, I've been journaling, and I probably have about 20 some journals that I've filled in my lifetime. The older I get, the harder sometimes it feels to make time for it, but um, it certainly becomes sort of like a self-care thing. And I think that's how I used it when I was young as well, as a way to like soothe and process certain things. I've always enjoyed walking. That sounds really like a old soul sort of thing, but I love
Yeah.
walking. I could walk for hours. I don't think there's any such thing for me as walking too long. I've not felt that yet, that I've walked too long in a day. Um,
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
I
I can see where those traits would lend themselves toward becoming a counselor, right? Like this sort of
Sure. Yeah.
introspection and the sort of calm contemplative motion. I think
Yeah.
that's pretty neat. Did you know what you wanted to study early on, or did it take you a while to find it?
I think I've always sort of known that I was interested in the human mind in some way. So I remember when I was in high school, I took a psychology class, and I was like, oh yeah, this is what I'm going to do. But in what way, I wasn't sure. If I didn't know if I was going to go the med school route or if I wanted to go the research route or so. But pretty early on, I was kind of settled on being a therapist of sorts. And so when I was in college, I toyed around with the idea of being a family and marriage therapist. And then I thought to myself, I'd like to broaden my experience. So I went into social work with a focus on clinical social work. Um, and in that capacity, I could do family marriage therapy once I'm licensed if I wanted to. And honestly, the older I got, I thought I think it gets too personal to do for me to do family and marriage therapy. It would be hard for me to sort of separate my own beliefs and my own experiences from the therapy that I provide. But it's also very possible. I think that could be said about many types of therapies or the different populations we work in. But yeah, I think I kind of always knew I would be in the therapy world, um, the human mind sort of
Mhm.
world.
Oh, that's great. That's lovely.
Yeah,
And so you just kind of smoothly floated right through to college and kept going through. Were those years pretty easy years? Were they very calm, peaceful years for you? Because at least you weren't, agonizing over what exactly to do.
yeah.
Or otherwise, were you pretty mellow during those years?
I have to say, I didn't appreciate it then because I think a lot of my peers did not have the same level of confidence in the route that they were taking. But in terms of like what I wanted to do with my life, career wise, um, yeah, it was pretty easy for me. I came in and I graduated undergrad in 3 years because I was able to kind of plan out my undergrad life in a way where, like at least coursework wise, where I could get the credits that I needed because I didn't struggle with, is this the major that I want to stick with? I just knew that this is what I had wanted. And I know again, for many people, that's not the case. And I didn't appreciate it then. And then now I'm like, man, many people don't know what they want to do. And in fact, I kind of think that many people shouldn't know what they want to do at 18 with the rest of their life. That's a, that's kind of like a bold statement to make. And thankfully I liked what I landed in. But um,
It is.
to
I
ask an
mean, in a
18
way,
year
there's
old, yeah, yeah,
yeah, there's probably some value in exploring a little bit, and probably
a
a lot of
hundred
18 year
percent,
olds would choose wrong if they were choosing right then.
a
But
hundred percent.
but clearly it looks like it was a good fit. So then at
Yeah,
what point did you meet Brandon? Or should I get
yeah,
it sounds like you must have been practicing for a while before you met him. Is that right? Or
yes,
how does the
yes.
timing all work out?
Yeah, so I met him in 2018. I was a social worker at the VA hospital here in Chicago at Hines, and I was in suicide prevention. That was the team that I was in, and so my specific role was to go up to the inpatient unit where veterans were recently admitted into inpatient psych as a result of a number of things. But my specific job was to meet with the veterans on the inpatient unit that may have just attempted suicide or were at very extremely high risk of dying by suicide and sort of work with them to mitigate risk upon discharge. And that's where I met Brandon. Brandon at the time, was an inpatient psychiatrist, and he really enjoys the inpatient psych setting. And so, what I mean by that is he really enjoys taking on some very difficult cases. And a lot of times, those difficult cases involve risk of suicide. And so, a lot of the cases that I would go up to the unit for would involve him as the attending. And so, we had an opportunity to get to know each other quite well. I was I really respected his work ethics and his, you know, how much he knew about a lot of different things. He's a very intelligent man, and also just extremely curious. Um, and over time, we just became friends. And then I think we just realized that we had a lot in common. One of the first things he said when we first met was, he said my name. He's like, Susan Zacharia. Is that a Malankara Orthodox? Do you
Whoa.
come from a Malankara Orthodox background? And I'm like, what is this green-eyed white male
What does
saying?
he know
What is
about
coming out of his
Malankara
mouth?
Orthodox?
Yeah, why would he know that? Why? How does he know that? And he's just an extremely curious person, and um, he's curious about different cultures and different religious traditions. And so even before me, this predates me. He was familiar with the Sierra Malabar Church and knew that there was a large Christian population in a state called Kerala in India. And to me, I'm like, nobody knows where my family is from, so that kind of caught me off guard. But
I bet it
um,
did.
yeah, and so
See,
that's where
who
we
knew
met.
that
And
that would be a good pickup line? But there you
I
go.
know. So that's what I thought. But that's what I thought. I thought it was reserved for me. But then since I've known him, he has a similar conversation with many people he meets because he's like, he really enjoys taking a stab at knowing where people's ancestry is from based on their last name.
Oh, that's
And so I'm
cool.
like, oh man, I'm not unique, but it worked for me. So
No, that
regardless.
is neat though, and that is really an attractive quality in a person.
Yeah.
I can see why you would like that. That's neat. And so both of you were working with seriously at risk patients. I would imagine that there's a really high burnout rate in that field. Did you end up continuing, like, have you stayed working with veterans consistently, or did you eventually
Yeah.
have to like
Yeah.
downgrade to maybe veterans who weren't in as dire a need, or have you been able to stay there at that level?
Yeah, so I started off doing substance use work, meaning therapy for individuals that struggle with substance use disorders, and then I moved into suicide prevention because I didn't want to be pigeonholed into a subspecialty, and I really enjoyed it. And that sounds sort of macabre to use that word to describe that work, but it was extremely meaningful and deeply human to connect with veterans and their family members and really speak bluntly about the risk of losing their own life at their own hand. And I found it to be extremely meaningful work. And, my colleagues um, also felt the same. And I think what makes it really bearable is the trust that I had with my colleagues and being able to kind of consult with them, but also like be real with them about how some cases are extremely difficult. But I since the suicide prevention position, I moved into providing general outpatient mental health work, which is also extremely difficult. But now, where I am at, and I see myself at for quite some time, I manage an outpatient substance use program. So that was my specialty in the very beginning, and that was sort of my goal when I started my career was to manage a program, supervise staff, hire staff. And so that's what I do now, and I really enjoy it. And my time in suicide prevention and outpatient mental health kind of inform me to be a better supervisor and a better manager of a clinic. So
Neat.
yeah,
All
it's
right.
difficult in different ways.
And so, and we always talk about how there are so many problems among veterans. Does it, I'm thinking that a lot of the veterans right now, like are there younger veterans who haven't seen combat who struggle, or is it people who fought in Afghanistan and in the Gulf Wars, or, where is that nowadays at this time? Do you know what
So
I'm saying?
yeah, so there's a good number of a majority of the veterans that we still see now are skew a little bit older. That doesn't mean that we don't have younger veterans. A lot of the veterans that we see now are from Vietnam and Gulf War, but we do have a lot of younger veterans. I think the difficulty with the younger veteran population is being able to accommodate their active family schedules and their work schedules as well. And so we have to get a little bit more creative about the programming that we offer. Um, I think since COVID, the expansion of telehealth services has been extremely helpful, and so we're able to see a lot more of those younger veterans who may be juggling working on their mental health needs with a family and a job,
Right.
so they can kind of go to a secure place but still be at work, maybe in between breaks, and be able to have a therapy session. Um,
Thank God.
but
Thank
yeah,
God. Yeah, it is.
we have
That
a
is
good
one of
number.
the positive side effects that has come out of the pandemic is so
Yeah.
much more use of that virtual office space.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah,
And so, and also I know you vice president of Ocamper? Tell us a little bit about
I
like
am.
how did you get involved with that? And it seems like you've done a lot of work, not just in the mental health directly in the mental health field, but then you've also gotten involved in church settings with mental
Yes.
health. And I want to hear a little
Yeah.
bit about that.
I think even in the very beginning when I was in college, when I wanted to go into therapy, I didn't know many people in my own community that was in mental health. I honestly didn't know any Malayali that was a therapist, that was a psychiatrist, because of how stigmatized talking about mental health was at the time, and I think still is, but certainly there's been far more conversation about it these days. And I think I felt so strongly about the topic, and I was so interested in the field, um, and I felt so passionate about the need to have these discussions within a parish setting that I essentially emailed the bishop at the time and said, "Hey, I am working towards a master's. I'm about to be licensed at this point. I would love to assist in a counseling ministry in any sort of capacity." And his response was, "It's not every day you get people from your jurisdiction saying, please give me an assignment, like let me do something." And
Yeah.
so he appointed me secretary for the counseling services, which um, kind of gave me free reign with another priest in the diocese at the time to do what we wanted to educate the Indian Orthodox community about mental health, stigma, and resources. So that's really where I started. And since then, I think it's fair to say that many people, like the youth conferences and programmings within the diocese, they're far more open to have conversations about mental health, which has been really exciting to see. And one of the things that we did, one of the projects I took on when I was the secretary of the counseling ministry in the Indian Orthodox Church, was a needs assessment where we surveyed the Indian Orthodox population as to what they think about when they consider mental health. How stigmatized is it for them? How many people struggle with it? How many people talk about it? How comfortable are we bringing these issues up to the church? And so that survey was used to really provide sort of psychoeducation for our community. And so as the years went on, I was connected with Dr. Philip Mamalakis, who informed me about this mental health task force that's sort of pan-Orthodox. And I got on board thanks to him. And there is a working group that was looking to create an assessment for a pan-Orthodox community. And so we kind of started talking about the needs assessment that was used in the Indian Orthodox Church, and we kind of created another assessment for the Orthodox community at large.
Yeah.
And slowly, I kind of made my way into the larger Orthodox mental health community, and here I am as vice president of the camper. I wasn't able to participate in this last year's conference because I had my daughter just 2 weeks before. But
Yeah,
I'm really
that'll
looking forward to next year. Yeah.
yeah, that'll kind of cut into it a little bit. You have
Yeah.
important
I
work.
have to say, yeah, I
You had
have to say,
you
I
had
was kind
better
of
work
considering.
going.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think you got the better end of that deal for sure, being home
I
with your
think so.
beautiful daughter. And so you and I were talking before the program about she came a little bit late, and
Yes.
so she's already taught you some patience. What
Oh,
else would you say
100%.
you're learning in these first 7 weeks of parenting? How's it going?
So, it's funny that you asked about learning because I did not want to know the gender of the baby. And my husband, Brandon, really wanted to know the gender. So we decided. that he would know the gender during the pregnancy and I would not. And he's an excellent secret keeper, and I genuinely did not want to know. And so I did not know that I was having a girl until I held her, or my husband gave me Anya, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's a girl, because I was 100% convinced I was going to have a boy. So much so that the week before, or 2 weeks before I gave birth, I wrote a letter to my, because I enjoy writing, that I wrote a letter to my future child that I would meet. And I said, I'm pretty sure you're a boy. And if you're a boy, I'm pretty sure your name is going to be Jonah. So I had a letter addressed to my baby boy, who was never real to begin with. So I think right from the start, it was a great lesson in humility of like, mother may not always know what's true, what's right.
Oh my goodness. And you know what? Even as they get older, like you think you know these things about them, and then you find out, like, oh, well, nope,
I'm
not
completely
that
off.
after all. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Like when parents are like, no, you're going to be a lawyer. I know you're going to be a lawyer. And they don't become a lawyer. And they really
Yeah.
don't want to be a lawyer. And it's okay.
Yeah.
But so where
Yeah.
did you get the idea for the name Jonah? I love that name. That's my
Yeah.
daughter's favorite book of the Bible, because, we
Oh,
read it
that's
in Holy Week.
wonderful.
And the
Yeah.
whole
So,
like Jonah sitting under that gourd
oh
and
my gosh, that's my
cursing the
favorite part of
world.
that book.
Like,
Yes, I love it. I love Jonah. Jonah is such a relatable character. So, the reason we had come up with Jonah, so my husband and I found out that I was pregnant on February 6th of this last year, which was his birthday. And so I surprised him for his birthday with the pregnancy result. But it was also the first day of the Nineveh fast in the Indian Orthodox tradition. And so the Nineveh fast is the sort of like it kind of prefigures the Great Fast. So it's a 3 day, really intense fast that happens, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 50 days before the Great Fast. And it really kind of prepares us to fast for the Great Fast. And so during the three-day fast, we typically go through the book of Jonah. And so since it was the beginning of the fasting period, um, I thought Jonah was a lovely name, and he agreed. And so we stuck with it. And then I think later that evening, we were like, Anya is a wonderful name. And we're like, yeah, Anya is a beautiful name. It's a pan-cultural name. There's an Anya in the Polish tradition. It's an Indian name. It's a universal name. It's um, you know, yeah. So we just loved it. So
I
we
love
decided the
that
name
you
the
two
first
just
day.
knew on the first day of
Yeah,
knowing you're pregnant, you've already worked out the name. Like you know
we
who
didn't
you
look
are
back.
and what you want to do. Like,
Yeah.
I like that. I
Yep.
like that.
Yep.
I'm interested too. The Nineveh fast, I've heard that phrase before and I hadn't known what it was. Is it
Yeah.
3 days because Jonah was 3 days in the belly of the whale?
Yes.
Oh, that's
Yep.
cool.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
After we sign off, I'm gonna be calling my daughter and telling her about this, and she's gonna get pretty fired up. But
Oh, it's beautiful.
so
It's
neat.
also a beautiful thing that the church does, because it could be truly prescribed. It's a very strict fast. However, it's only 3 days, so it's really doable to really adhere to the strict fast. And over the course of 50 days during the Great Fast, it's hard for me to stick to the discipline of reading something every day for a certain period of time. But if you were to tell me for 3 days to read the Book of Jonah, it's doable, and
Yep.
you set yourself up to succeed. So every year, that's what we do. And
That's kind of
it's a
great, actually. I
yeah,
I really like the logic of that really appeals to me because it is true. You want to take on so much, but even at the beginning of the fast, I'm not going to be able to do this the whole time, so I need to
right,
be careful and cut down my
yeah,
expectations when I make my
right.
plans. But for 3 days, you can throw yourself in. You
You
can
could
do
do
all
anything.
sorts of things. Oh, that's neat.
Absolutely,
Oh, well,
absolutely.
Susan, this has been delightful. Thank you so much for coming on the program tonight.
Thank you for having me. This has been so fun.
It was really, really fun. And thanks to our caller, TV Weber. And thanks to Matushka Trudy for being here. And thanks to all of you for joining us. Come on back next week to meet another Everyday Orthodox Christian.